Okay, thank you everybody. I've just come from a 2-year-old birthday party, so you've got to be more entertaining than that. So let's see how we go. Okay, so it's going to be an interesting talk, so stay awake. Okay, I ask this question every year. Now, this should be an easy one this year because the flu season didn't actually finish until the end of December. So, normal season? Any takers for normal season? No? How about low, medium, big, humongous? Right, well, it's either big or humongous. That's the, definitely not the last one. Okay, so there's been plenty of press activity. It's been going ever since the season started. Here's a few snapshots here. And if you've got a good drug, you can sell it to Merck for $9.2 billion. Okay, various forms of surveillance. Aspirin, which is the GP surveillance. Good luck making something out of that. There was flu, I think, according to that. Flu tracking, same again. My favourite, the NNTSS. Again, this is only a tip of the iceberg things, but it's a pretty big tip this year. And you can see there in the dark blue, there is the 2025 season, and the red in 2022, light blue in 2024, and 2023 is a bit buried in there. So when there's the season starting, it's still starting earlier than it used to. So we had a very early start back straight after COVID, moving a little bit, but not much in 2023 and 2024, and quite similar in 2025. This is where it used to peak pre-COVID. So we have had quite a shift in the epidemiology of influenza. And if you draw a sort of straight line across here, nobody will tell me when the season starts and when it ends, so I draw my own lines. So according to my lines, we had a season of 33 weeks, which is pretty incredible, more than half of the year. And there was something special about this year, or a bit more special about this year. We had a second bump, and way, way later than we would expect. And if you look at the numbers are quite dramatic there. So the last 3 months of the year, we had 20% of the cases for the whole year in the last 3 months. And it was only really knocked on the head by school holidays and 40-degree temperatures, I think, and the odd bushfire. And you can see there the numbers from the previous years. 2023, we had a bit of a bump, but nothing like the bump we've had in 2025. Everybody tells me it's more testing, everything's down to more testing. You're an idiot, don't you realise that? Well, I'm not quite an idiot. If you look at the other numbers, COVID, down, RSV, no change, pertussis, down. So what's going on with influenza? It's not just testing. Most labs are using multiplex testing, so it's not down to just testing. There is something real about these numbers. And there is variation in those numbers. If you look at the states, and this is a very complicated graph, I wish they would come up with something better in the Australian Respiratory Surveillance Group. Who's here from that group? Put your hands up and I'll give you some advice, free of charge. Okay, so you can see there are some differences there. Australia. Victoria and New South Wales usually lead the pack. That was pretty much the case. Northern Territory had quite an outbreak through their wet period there, and they also enjoyed the secondary period here at the end. If we look at the ages are typical of what we see here with most of the cases in the younger age groups and young adults. And that's probably is a bit of bias in testing, but also probably reflects this year reasonably accurately. And this second peak here, if you look at all that and you can unjumble that, there's a better way of looking at it. I don't know how many of you are on this mailing list, but this new forecasting group that is operated in Australia and New Zealand. This is a graph that they've been producing up until middle of January there. And this is looking at the subtyping data for influenza. So not just the numbers of cases, the subtyping. So influenza A, H1 and AH3. So on this graph here, the blue is the AH1 and the green is the AH3. And you can see there that most of the early part of the season, or the main part of the season, was AH1 viruses, and then that green line at the end there that occurred in all states bumped up to give us a bit of a surprise leading into summer. And we did a nice job of ramping that virus up and transmitting it to all our neighbouring countries. So New Zealand had a bump in H3s, which we can track, not just on these, but we can do some phylogeography, and we've done that, and shows a very strong link to going to New Zealand. And I'll bet my bottom dollar, we haven't done the work yet, but also New Caledonia timing was just right, Fiji timing was just right in this October, November, December period. We didn't stop there. We also spread it to Singapore, Philippines, and possibly Thailand in that period of time. All saw upticks in H3, shown in that bluey colour. And what was causing that was a new variant of H3, which you've probably heard about, the subclade K, super K, whatever else you want to call it, and that's shown in orange on these frequency tables. And this is taken off Next Strain, which looks at all the global circulation of influenza virus. And you can see here in the orange, there was a big tick up in the second half of the year, globally, Australia, and also in the US, but the US lagged behind us in terms of frequencies. And this is what that K variant looks like now in terms of the H3s. This is just looking at the H3 viruses, not the other viruses which are circulating, but this is the dominant virus which is around. And the K is the dominant part of the H3, shown in orange again. So you can see Australia overall, the H3s in those last 3 months made up the majority of the viruses we saw throughout the year, and they were Ks. The US has got a lot of K, Europe, Russia, everywhere except for South America. And they're just starting. So earlier on, there was nothing in South America. We started to see upticks in Brazil, and we'll presumably we'll see it in other South American countries as well. But overall, in 2025, as I said, we had mainly a H1 season. And you see the far right there, that's the Australian map by state and by type and subtype. So everywhere was H1 dominated with a reasonable amount of B viruses, especially in WA. And that H3 component, shown in red, didn't amount to a large proportion of the viruses when we look at them overall. These are viruses which were submitted to the Collaborating Centre, and that's only about 2% of the viruses which are recorded in NDSS. Who did it affect? When you look at the age groups there, in terms of hospitalisation, we saw the picture was a little bit different from usual. Often the 6 months to 4 years and 5 to 15 has a reasonable load of admissions. We also saw a reasonable number in the adults as well. Not so bad in the elderly this year, and you can see at the end of the season there, which was mainly H3, the elderly really didn't cop it very much for a change, and it was mainly the children and young adults. In terms of deaths, the system has changed, as you will know, from recording in NDSS numbers to the Bureau of Statistics. So the numbers are up and about a bit, so getting a little bit of an idea from year to year is a bit difficult. But you can see, according to the Bureau of Statistics for the last 3 years, it was 470, 806, and we had a larger number this year, but not a ridiculously large number. When you have 500,000 cases, it's not surprising you're into the thousands. Okay, so vaccine effectiveness. How well did our vaccine work overall? You can look at these later at your leisure, but the VE wasn't too bad. So against general practice, and this is aspirin numbers, we had a VE, and these are interim numbers, it was 56%, which is not too bad. And of course, the kids usually do better than everybody else, which is as per usual. And in terms of hospitalisation, again, not too bad, 49% for overall. And again, kids usually do better. But you're all asking me, what about that K subclade that came at the end? Well, everybody's jumped on board here. If you're a reader of Euro Surveillance, there's a paper coming out every week on a new VE. Here's just 3 of them. The most recent one is the last one there from Canada, Danuta-Skoronsky's data. And we also have crunched some data as well using aspirin and Flucan data. So thanks for that. And so overall, it's much better than you would think. The figures there don't look all that impressive, but 48% overall is pretty good. And again, kids did very well, adults not so good. Didn't have enough for an estimate in the elderly, so it shows you they weren't as badly affected as we might expect. In terms of Flucan for the hospitalised, again, not too bad. 31% could be better, could be worse. But the elderly actually pretty good, 55%. And Canada had similar figures for the adults, but they had lower numbers for the children. And the difference with the English study is the English had very good protection in children, and they've got the live attenuated vaccine, so that may explain why they had a better VE with the kids against the K variant. Okay, can't keep up with myself. Okay, so how's our vaccine program going? Well, it's not really going very well at all. So who here is from the ACT? Right, I don't see a single person out there, maybe. Right, stand up, give yourself a hey, whoa, give her a hand. You know, they're clearly doing better than all the other states. Across all the age groups, You just missed out on one. You've got to work harder on the 65-year-olds. You got pipped at the post by 2%. So I think this is pretty miserable reading for the rest of the states, so you need to pick up your act. In terms of Aboriginal, you need to pick up your ACT ACT as well. You're down to 2 gold medals there. And again, that's pretty dismal. If you look at the total number of vaccines we're giving out, we had a ripper year last year. We increased by 212,000 on 2024, which is a lousy 2.4%. And we're still at 33%. We seem to be stuck in the mud at 33% or 32%. You can see the figures on the right there. There's only one in the last 5 years we've got above 40%. So what's happening now and what's happened last year? So free vaccines seem to be waning. We're down to just a couple of states in 2025, and in 2026, Queensland are the only ones that put up their hands. Has anybody got any changes to that for 2026? Any states want to volunteer free vaccines? Didn't think so. But even free vaccines really don't do magic. Queensland dropped by 1%. WA finally had a rise of 8%. And New South Wales, without doing anything, had a 1.7% increase. What about flu miss? Flu miss is the one for 6 months to what are we licensed here, till 18, I think, going for 49, but the states are only interested in kids. And so, again, we can't get universal use of this product. WA 2 to 12, well done WA. The other states only 2 to 5 offering it. Victoria, Tassie and Northern Territory can't afford it. So what's in that vaccine? So there's a couple of changes, so it's definitely worth being revaccinated next year. The H3 component is not a K virus, but it's a pretty close match, so definitely worth getting. And there's an update on the H1 virus as well. So what's happening in the Northern Hemisphere? Well, I've sort of preempted this a little bit, so here's showing you what's happened in the Northern Hemisphere. Again, most countries had early seasons in the Northern Hemisphere, dominated by H3, shown in that dark blue. UK, their season is on the wane, so they had a very early season start, and it's bumped and gone down, and probably will go down even more, but they've had a lot of cases. Most of those have been H3, as I mentioned earlier on, and mostly in the younger children, so 5 to 14 and 15 to 24 is their biggest bumps there, shown in the right-hand side. What's happening in the US? They're sort of over their peak as well, so purple is their really outrageous case numbers, and you can see there's only a single state with that currently, but there's a lot of red still there. 25, 26 numbers shown there. If you can look at it, it's in a red colour with some triangles on it there, so it's a little bit below that other red peak, which is mighty confusing, but it's on the way down as well. So that's influenza-like illness measured, and again, they're seeing mainly H3 shown in the red on that bar chart. Deaths, relatively low, only 80 deaths in the paediatric population so far, compared to a record year last year of 289 deaths in under 18 with proven influenza. And their other measure here, this is across all age groups, pneumonia and influenza mortality, again much less than the previous year. Quick date on zoonotic influenza is still around. Anybody that thinks that we're the lucky country because we haven't had H5, well, it's still around. And Heard Island is not shown on this map, but it's at Heard Island as well. There was 3,710 events in that time period, which is a pretty short time period, only 3 months, and mainly in Europe and the US. Many countries don't even bother reporting this, so you've got to keep that in mind. So we heard a lot about dairy cows. Here's what the situation looks like from 2024 till now. But if you look at the last 30 days, there's no cases been reported. Whether that's true or not, I'm a little sceptical, but the numbers are going down. That's the good thing. Human cases, no real advance in human cases in 2025, just a very, very small number. 2 deaths through this H5N1. And if you look at where those deaths have occurred, they've occurred where the cows and also where the poultry outbreaks have been, but the majority of them have been associated with dairy cows, followed by poultry farms. So there's been 4 more deaths in humans that have been recorded. 2 of those were Cambodia. One was fatal and one was severe. There was a severe case in Mexico and a fatal infection in the US. H9N2 doesn't get much publicity, but there's ongoing cases, some recent cases even reported last week from Hong Kong. These are usually mild infections, but still, worth keeping an eye on H9N2. Swine viruses, we all remember 2009 was a swine virus, and there's been the odd swine infection detected. But they're quite difficult to detect. Most labs would just miss them. So in summary, we had a whopper year in 2025. The influenza cases were above average early on through summer and even early autumn. The main season started in May and continued its merry way right through to December. With the main peak in June, it was a very flat peak, lasted about 9 weeks, that peak, which is unusual, and we had that secondary peak in December. And we didn't really drop off until January. So we had record high numbers, 502,000. What's the real number? At least multiply that by 10. Influenza H1 predominated the main part of the season, followed by influenza B, and then we had some H3 later in the year. Kids were most affected. In Danuta's paper, she says that everybody over 30 years old was significantly differently affected by K, or they weren't affected by K, and that's more or less what we saw as well. There was a higher number of deaths than what we've seen in the last few years. I haven't talked about antiviral resistance, but we detected very, very few. So if you're prescribing antivirals, you should have high confidence that they will work if given within 48 hours of onset of symptoms. Vaccine matches, I think the VEs were reasonable. We can always hope for better, but we got a bit of a surprise when they were as good as they were against the Ks. And the vaccination rates have improved marginally. The components of two of the components have changed for the 2026 vaccine. B. Amigato, you're not going to hear about that much more in the future because it's been not only not circulating since March 2020, it's also been removed from all the global vaccine supply. Next year will be a trivalent vaccine, not a quadrivalent vaccine, or this year, 2026. Influenza in the Northern Hemisphere began early and high in most countries and now reducing, mostly K viruses. H5N1 is still circulating in poultry, fortunately not in Oceania. US dairy cows is low, and there's only been a few extra human cases, so somebody's learning the lessons. I had a similar prediction last year, so I got it wildly wrong last year, so let's go for the same prediction this year. Thank you. And if you want to read more about the K viruses, we too had something in Eurovirals.
Thanks again. It's that 2-year-old birthday party. Yes, John.
In flu mist, given that's been revised, and Richard Peabody reported earlier when they had good levels of coverage in kids, it had an impact on older people. What would be your understanding if we got a good level of protection or high level of coverage in children in terms of the impact on influenza and particularly in older people?
Well, I'm not a modeller, John, so I would dare say it's going to have some effect, but that's a very modest rollout compared to what the UK have. The UK have it across the country, and they have it in much wider age groups. So, they're looking at a bigger impact. I know the early studies were in smaller cohorts, but I think we would need to get a more extensive rollout and more age groups covered, at least primary schools.
It's chicken and egg. So if we can actually get the states to all offer it, and then we go out and measure to see what the impact is, it'll be very important, up above my earlier question about the level of protection by doing intranasal things there. It would be really important for people to have that data available and say this could be the impact and might be an argument for actually promoting it in terms of cost effectiveness.
Sure, I'd be happy just to get that kids' vaccination rate above 25%. If we could double that, I'd be satisfied with that.
And I think
forget about the oldies.
The flu mist is more likely to do it, I think, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Michael.
I've sat at this meeting for nearly 30 years. I think 27 is wrong. And it started out with flu, and Alan and now you, Ian, give a great talk, and COVID has gobbled up some of the time. Is my registrar who sits in this meeting in 30 years going to have to listen to flu, COVID, disease X and disease Y? I mean, when are the next pandemics going to become endemic over the next 30 years? Is it going to be 1, 2 or none?
Don't know. Is that a good answer? That's look, I think most people just are very blasé about COVID. COVID's come and gone as far as most people are concerned. Flu's never going. So you better get used to that, your registrar.
Alan? Alan Chen.
Danuta's been big on these cohort effects, and I understand that sort of the theory is that it's about original infections and we're falling. Does the code look like anything that's circulated?
Yeah, Danuta loves doing microanalysis on every residue in the HA molecule and then ascribing an explanation to it. Look, I think there's, some of the glycosylation changes, they could be important. I think she might be on the right track. I haven't drilled down on her numbers, what she's got in those groups. I only had a look at the paper last week. Look, I think there is probably some truth in that. Whether that's the only explanation or not, I think it needs more data. I think Danuta's the only one that's really analysed that closely, so she could be right, partially.